Figure it out yourself. Those were the last words my mother said to me as she slid a $120,000 tuition check across the dinner table. Not to me, but to my little sister. 9 years later, I stood in the back of that same sister's wedding, watching my parents pour a fortune into a celebration for a future they never believed I'd have. My mother leaned over to my father and whispered, "Why does it feel like something's missing?" She had no idea that in less than 4 minutes, a single word from the groom would shatter her perfect family lie and end a decade of silence. My name is Paige, and this isn't a story about revenge. It's about the justice that comes when you stop waiting for a seat at a table where you were never welcome. Growing up in our pristine West Hartford home, my sister Julia was the investment, while I was merely the overhead. Julia got the new dresses and piano lessons. I got the hand-me-down textbooks and the cold reminder to make do. My mother, Donna, used to introduce us at barbecues like a product line. "This is Julia, she's going to do great things," followed by a vague gesture toward me, "and this is Paige." No pride. Just a name. When I finally got into college with a half scholarship, I did everything right. I presented a 4-year budget, showing I only needed $62,000 to bridge the gap. My mother didn't even open the folder. She told me I needed to learn independence, while Julia's full tuition at Syracuse was already settled because she had potential. That night, I packed one suitcase and left. I worked 3 jobs, scrubbing industrial grease off dishes and working graveyard shifts at a gas station, just to keep my head above water. While Julia was posting photos of her new Audi, I was sleeping in my jacket because my dorm window wouldn't close. But here's the thing about the independent daughter. I wasn't just surviving, I was building something they couldn't control. And 9 years later, the man my sister was about to marry was the one person who knew exactly who I had become. What was the secret Julia was hiding from her billionaire fiancé? And why did my presence at the altar turn the groom's face pale? For nearly a decade, my life was a jigsaw puzzle with no picture on the box. I survived on 4 hours of sleep, eating leftover restaurant scraps, and scrubbing floors while my sister, Julia, lived her best life on a terrace in Florence, funded by our parents' unwavering support. My mother, Donna, had crafted a masterpiece of a lie, telling the entire family that I was the difficult one who had abandoned them. But while they were editing me out of their history, I was building a future they couldn't touch. I clawed my way through a degree in healthcare technology, eventually founding my own company, MedBridge Solutions. By the age of 26, I wasn't the struggling dropout my mother described. I was a CEO closing a $4.2 million funding round. Professionally, I went by Paige Alcott, a name I had earned in boardrooms, far away from the dinner table where I was once told I was just overhead. Then, the collision happened. An invitation arrived for Julia's wedding to a man named Marcus Webb. My father, Richard, had smuggled a shaky note inside the envelope, begging me to come. He didn't know that Marcus Webb was actually my biggest client, a man about to sign a multi-million-dollar deal with my company as part of our standard professional due diligence. My team began a routine credential check on Marcus's clinic staff, a list that included his fiancée, Julia. My software doesn't care about family loyalty. It only cares about the truth. And what the system found was a landmine. Julia's master's degree didn't exist. She hadn't even finished her sophomore year. I walked into that wedding in a simple navy dress, accompanied by my best friend Lena, ready for closure but expecting a storm. My mother immediately tried to hide me behind a pillar, introducing me to guests as a daughter who was still finding herself. She had no idea that the groom was scanning the room for his strategic tech partner, the woman who held the power to make or break his company. When Marcus finally spotted me, the mask my mother had spent 9 years building didn't just crack, it disintegrated in front of 200 guests. But what happens when the groom realizes his perfect bride is a fraud? And why did Marcus choose the middle of the reception to confront Julia? The reception was a sea of champagne and forced smiles until Marcus stepped to the microphone. My mother, Donna, was beaming, convinced she had successfully sidelined me to a corner table. She didn't realize that Marcus hadn't looked at his bride in 20 minutes. He was looking at me, his lead consultant, and then at the forged academic transcripts my system had flagged only hours before. "I'd like to thank my new family," Marcus began, his voice dropping an octave. "Especially my mother-in-law, Donna, for raising such a dedicated daughter. He paused, the silence stretching until it became uncomfortable. It's funny. I spent 3 years falling in love with a woman I thought was a pediatric nurse. But today, I found out the person who actually runs the systems for my clinics, the woman I trust with my entire livelihood, is sitting in the back of this room. And she's the sister you told me didn't exist. The room went ice cold. My mother's glass slipped from her hand, shattering against the marble floor. Julia turned a ghostly shade of white, her hand trembling against her lace gown. Marcus walked off the stage, straight past his bride, and stood in front of me. "Paige," he said, loud enough for every aunt, uncle, and friend who had ignored me for a decade to hear. I spent all morning trying to figure out why my fiancé's name flagged a fraud alert in our credentialing software. Then I realized, she's been using your old textbooks and your identity to fake a career she never earned. The golden child hadn't just taken the tuition money, she had tried to steal my life. Julia had been collecting a paycheck from Marcus's firm using a digital shadow of my credentials. My mother rushed over, her face twisted in a mask of desperation. "Marcus, honey, it's just a misunderstanding. Paige was always the difficult one, she probably set this up to." "Stop," Marcus commanded. He looked at my mother with pure liquid disgust. "You told me Paige was a college dropout who lived on handouts. My company pays her firm 6 figures a month because she's the best in the industry. The only person living on handouts here is the woman I just married." The wedding wasn't just over, the family legacy was in ashes. But the final confrontation between a mother and the daughter she discarded was about to get even darker. What was the last thing I said before walking out forever? The silence that followed was heavier than the 9 years of abandonment I had endured. Marcus didn't wait for an explanation. He handed his wedding ring to a stunned groomsman and walked toward the exit, pausing only to look at me with a nod of profound respect. He was done with the lies, and so was I. My mother, Donna, finally snapped. She lunged toward me, her face contorted in a way I'd never seen. "You ruined this," she hissed, her voice a jagged glass edge. "You were always the jealous one, Paige. You couldn't let her have one day. We gave you everything, a roof, a name, and you repay us by destroying your sister's life." I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized for the first time that she had no power over me. The woman who had denied me a future while handing my sister a $120,000 check was now a stranger. "I didn't destroy her life, Mom," I said, my voice steady and calm. "I built mine. Julia is the one who chose to build hers on a foundation of my hard work and your lies. You told everyone I was the problem because it was easier than admitting you failed me. But look around. The only thing missing from this room isn't a daughter, it's the truth." I turned to my father, who was staring at the floor, unable to meet my eyes. He had known. He had always known. I walked out of that ballroom, the sound of my heels echoing against the marble, leaving behind the white colonial house version of a family that never truly existed. Today, I am Paige Alcott. I am 27, I run a company I built with my own 2 burned, dishwater-wrinkled hands, and I sleep in a home I paid for myself. To anyone out there who was ever the overhead or the difficult child, their rejection is not your reflection. You are not the problem they say you are. You are the survivor they never expected.